My gaming philosophy of the day that I'd like to shove into this review is that of cautiously optimistic expectation. As part of a Fat Man tradition, I'm skeptical about every potentially good game's actual quality before I sink my teeth into it. Nothing is sacred until it proves itself sacred. But that's not to say that I don't want it to be. In other words, I expect nothing but hope for everything, and I've kept that up for quite some time. The only reliable way a game can break through this paradigm thing and actually disappoint me is by promising something wonderful through its gameplay, and then breaking that promise. Though I wouldn't classify it as a poor game, far from it assuredly, Primordia is one of those titles that successfully manages to establish something truly great, and then slowly weather it away. Two of the three most important components of an adventure game are the story and setting, and Primordia pulls them both off very well. The game as a whole starts out on an average note. It opens up in a big desolate wasteland, and the only story it teases is a journey to scrounge up resources to keep a generator running. But from that point, all of that progresses over the course of the narrative into an absolutely wonderful story with well-written characters in a rich, well-designed world. At the same time, though, Primordia has to worry about its puzzles, the third and most important adventure game component. Overall, the puzzles are solid, and in many ways they go further than what most adventure games can accomplish. Nearly all of them have meaning that ties into the plot and world, and many offer alternative solutions that manage to make sense, change relationships with characters, and alter the ending. After a while, though, the puzzles that were once great begin to deteriorate, hinging on minute details that blend in with the rest of the environment and story. They don't follow horrible adventure game logic. I can count instances of bullshit puzzles that rely entirely on reading the developer's mind with one hand, and that's a pretty big feat. But as the story and storytelling reach creative brilliance, the gameplay experiences a different fate. And the story really is wonderful. The narrative follows Horatio Nullbuilt and his companion Crispin Horatio Built as they explore and rummage for spare parts in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. An adventure sets in as a big robot steals their power source and they want to get it back, but it soon becomes apparent that the places they end up have a much more interesting story to tell. The game's tagline is, "What happened to the humans?" but the question doesn't play a major role in the game, and quite frankly its answer is fairly obvious. However, most of the game world is shrouded in mystery. The purportedly glorious city of Metropole is in an odd state of disorder. The wasteland surrounding it is dotted with relics and remains of old civilizations and conflicts, and some of Horatio's past, as evidenced by his patronymic Nullbuilt, is elusive even to him. I'm not going to tell much more about the story, lest I spoil it too much, but I will say that all the detail put into the game world comes together in one of the best and most dramatic computer game stories in recent memory. The delivery is nothing short of great as well. Primordia has a lot of exposition through dialogue naturally, but just as well it makes wonderful use of its puzzles and environments. All of the more mysterious story elements have conclusions, but depending on some of the actions you take, not every question is answered concretely by the end. However, the environments and characters all allude to little details that provide excellent fuel for speculation, and make the world something truly worth exploring and influencing. The writing is of overall high quality as well, but it feels like it doesn't quite fit the atmosphere of the game. All of the characters are robots, and although they really do shine as unique and well thought out, most of them, including the two protagonists, don't actually seem all that much like robots. For the majority of the story, you could probably replace the robots with, say, aliens and substitute words like servo and oil with other words like proboscis and Romulan ale, and you'd have a pretty compelling story about aliens instead. But what really matters is that the writing is still in fact competent and compelling in its own right, and all the important characters who do act robotic in some way add enough to the atmosphere to make apparent that the world is robotic not just in a cosmetic sense. The game also uses humor to great effect. It's by no means a comedy story, but it has some truly funny moments that are absolutely welcome between the darker turns it takes, and the comedy never gets in the way of anything. I was concerned especially that the companion character would end up a sort of robot Neelix thing, but even he pulls off some pretty creative wisecracks and still manages to be a genuinely sympathetic companion on top of that. And this is all backed by wonderful voice talent and an absolutely gorgeous aesthetic. Logan Cunningham, best known previously as the orgasmic Bastion narrator, really does justice to Horatio's stoical disposition. The rest of the voice cast is diverse and somehow consistently just as impressive. The visuals are really wonderful for the setting as well. Everything's hand-drawn in a style that's kind of surreal and warped, but still believable. And despite the game's low resolution, everything is still easy on the eyes, and all the important details are visually distinct. Primordia backs up its story with pretty good puzzles, and presents these puzzles very well. The puzzles are often driven entirely by the plot and narrative, meaning that there's very little puzzling for the sake of puzzling. Instead, the game stays pretty rational and only forces predicaments on you that will make actual progress in the narrative, instead of just progress from game screen to game screen. There is the occasional moment of arbitrary, far-fetched item silliness, but as I mentioned before, it's very sparse. You travel with a selection of tools throughout the campaign, and whenever they seem like they'll be applicable to puzzles, they are, and they don't end up making things too easy either. They lend themselves nicely to a few of the multiple solutions as well. But the multiple solutions extend to more complex puzzles as well without becoming ridiculous. One of my favorites involves a legal dispute between two characters. They offer you a chance to arbitrate the case if you can solve a logic problem for them in order to prove your competence. If you're a fucking idiot like me and you fail one too many times, they send you out to search for somebody else who can help with the problem. Both solutions are logical, but still involve a genuine challenge. The problem influences characters' reactions to you, and it fits within the narrative very nicely. Your companion Crispin proves his worth as a useful component of a few puzzles, and as a valuable but not overbearing hint giver. You can click on him whenever, and he'll provide or reiterate tidbits of helpful information. What's really impressive, however, is how well he can disguise this in regular casual dialogue that discusses the situation. He never functions directly as the hint guy or anything like that. He gives actual conversation and speculation, and he never makes things painfully obvious. If I was describing the entire game, it's pretty obvious that right about now, I would be recommending it with every fiber of my being to everybody who happens to stumble across this video, but I'm not. Not quite anyway. In regards to puzzles, I just described roughly the first 2/3 of the game, and after that my praise turns into criticism. A while after you make it to the second of 2 hub levels, the puzzles that Primordia presents really hit a snag. The story and the environment you can explore both grow much larger, but the gameplay can't really keep up. The puzzles have about the same qualities as they had in the previous hours, but they're spread across a wider, much more detailed environment, and certain components are hidden in details or objectives that feel superfluous and definitely deserve more expansion. Because of this, it's entirely possible for your progress in some puzzles to come to a complete halt, because you've gleaned all the information and items you can from all the sources that appear relevant. Whenever this happens, you'll find your solution lies in something that was seemingly superfluous or unrelated. After the fact, the game will often provide a logical enough explanation for why you had to go elsewhere and how that object or information found elsewhere is related to the story. But by then, it's a little too late to demonstrate relevance. Without spoiling the actual puzzles or story, a few examples of this problem that come to mind are things that really could have been expanded into larger story elements. For instance, at one point, Crispin spots a gynoid he wants to flirt with. Once you help him gather the confidence to flirt with her, you are rewarded with a small, seemingly inconsequential item that just so happens to be a necessary component in a completely different quest. If you haven't done this romance side quest yet and are stuck on the main side quest looking for the missing item, chances are that you wouldn't imagine you'd be able to get it from a short side quest about an aspect of the story that barely matters. But it's a quest and aspect of the story that could have mattered much more. I mean, who doesn't want robot romance in a computer game? If Crispin expressed more interest in pursuing a relationship, and the side quest involved an actually interesting love interest, matters would be different. To people who might be stuck, the quest would look far less superfluous and offer a clearer incentive to play it. A more important love interest could also add some more stakes that would influence the outcome of the narrative, or even connect itself more strongly to the other quest that, depends on it. The game also has robo-zombies of a sort that connect to a door-opening puzzle, but even though they're depicted dramatically and are heavily related to that puzzle, they barely play a role in the story after they're introduced. They could have played a larger role and subsequently had a more noticeable connection to the predicament at hand, but as they are now, they are seemingly unrelated, and they contain a crucial detail that is entirely missable. There are plenty of ways that the expansion of little details could have improved both the story and the gameplay. Most of my criticism for Primordia is levied against the puzzles in the closing act, and if you've been counting along with me, you'll notice that is 1/3 of 1/3 of the entire game, and that doesn't sound like a particularly bad experience. However, because of the importance of puzzles in an adventure game, and the fact that the final third of the story is where it becomes certifiably brilliant, there is something wrong with the game. At the same time as you're experiencing an absolutely wonderful story in an absolutely wonderful world, the pacing of its narrative is beginning to slip, so it doesn't go down nearly as smoothly as the rest of the game. I've gone through plenty of other similarly flawed games and loved them unconditionally, but because of the unfortunate hit the puzzles take on the game's pacing, Primordia leaves me with a bit of disappointment and a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. The majority of the game is wonderful, and it's overall a pretty good game, and absolutely one of the most interesting titles released recently. But after a while, when it matters most, it doesn't quite hold up to the standards it sets for itself.
Your mouth, your nipples, down between your legs too.